Well, hello again and welcome to Tuesday Chats, and I'm delighted today to have Reverend Dr. Heather Morris with us. Hello Heather, great to see you.
Hello Stephen, lovely to be here and great to have the conversation.
Yeah, great that you can join us. I've had you in mind for a while for Tuesday Chat, and so I'm really pleased that you can share with us today. And I guess we'll cover all sorts, but maybe I suppose just first of all, I'd like to sort of reflect on maybe your early life and sort of the things that would motivate you in life, or the things that sort of formed you in many ways. So do you want to tell us about your sort of setting growing up, or
I'll do that, certainly, yes. So yeah, it's always interesting looking back and seeing the first things that come into your mind, isn't it? So Dad is a Methodist minister, so grew up in that context of seeing real faith lived, Stephen. I think that's my big childhood memory, very happy childhood. And it's the wee things, isn't it? Funny, others, my husband Neil, said to me when he started coming into our house, pointing out things that you never noticed because you're growing up in the house. So things like how, mum and dad used to always try and make sure the other one got the nicer meat for dinner or the bigger portion of dessert, or those sorts of things that were normal for me growing up. But just as I look back, and when Neil noted it, just a sign of love lived out, really. So, and I think the other part of my family history is on both sides, actually, so grateful for that. But the Kingston side, my maiden name, where there was the history of missionaries and folks living out faith in that way, and that so grew up with the stories of my grandfather and grandmother on my father's side. Spent many years in Nigeria, and at that time, it was difficult to have children with you, so the children were at home, my father and his brother and sister, and living with that story of a real family sacrifice and thinking, would I do that? Was it right? But actually seeing a family that that were really close, and that God had held in the most unlikely of circumstances. So that's the sort of context in which I grew up. One of those people who can't remember the first time they gave their life to Jesus. For me, it's a story of growing faith and understanding. So can point to particular times. And do have to say that really bothered me for a long time, into teens and 20s even, that I couldn't say it was on that date and time. That was a real trouble to me for a long time, not in the 20s, maybe, certainly in teens. But now, just God works in so many different ways in different lives, doesn't so it's that sense of that was certainly my experience growing up.
Powerful, wonderful, and that's a powerful heritage that you or family come into. Your journey in your sort of earlier years, or in teens and sort of young adulthood, what did you see yourself going into the ministry, or was that
No, it wasn't. It was, I think, certainly not consciously. I think that because of the family, sort of history, and it happens to be Methodism and ministry there, I think I remember my dad speaking to me at one point about being worried about pressure being on my brother, in a context where it was all men at that stage, probably, chatting to me just about, he never wanted my brother to feel any pressure in that direction. And just broadening that out as context changed and as women went into ministry, I think there was never pressure in that way. I certainly didn't love God, wanted to serve God, but actually when I was leaving, went to Wesley, loved Wesley, but when I was leaving school, then it was sciencey medical things I was interested in. So applied for medicine and for speech therapy. That was my direction of travel. And so one of those at 18 then had to make a decision between medicine in UCC and speech therapy in Dublin. So that was one of those sort of you know, when I look back and think of those decision-making times, and decided on speech therapy, and loved that really interesting course. You know, lots of contact with people, and then worked for a year in Dublin North city centre. And it was during that year I candidated for ministry. So it was during the time in Trinity that that I began to feel a sense of God's call to this particular ministry.
Super.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly when I think of you, Heather, I just think of a warm pastoral heart, and pastoral care being a focus. And I understand you did your doctorate in, was it pastoral care for those with dementia? I've got that right. But anyway, just broadly, just under, do you want to share any reflections on your pastoral heart and convictions?
I think you're the same, Stephen. You know, relationships matter so much, don't they? You know, and it's that, I think for me, and we see in Jesus, we see Jesus who's interested in people. You know, Jesus who pushes beyond boundaries again and again, and who takes time with people. And that's and we see it in God, Creator. You know, we see it in every aspect of God and the Holy Spirit who draws us together. I don't think it's stretching things just to say that it's God's desire that relationships matter, that people remember, that individuals matter. So for me, pastoral care is part of the enacting and making real of that truth about God. And I think we've seen, so that's the pastoral drive in me. And you know, we can have lots of conversations about the role of the pastoral role in terms of church growth, and those are interesting conversations and good conversations. But I think there is a pastoral role there, and I think that it makes a huge difference when we know together that we're remembered and that we matter. So I can think of times in my own life when, you know, when there was illness in our family, the difference it made when somebody turned up. You know, and that's they modeled and prayed with us. But actually, it was the turning up. It was that you're not forgotten, you're not alone. And that's been writ large for me through COVID, when we've seen and we've all experienced what, you know, I don't want to state it too strongly, but you know, what elements of isolation feel like, and the difference that it means when somebody rings us and says, how's it going, or a quick text, or anything that's that, or puts food on the doorstep, because you're going through a hard time. And that for me is at the heart of pastoral care. It's being remembered. It's that individuals matter. And I think God's at work in those pastoral acts. So that's why they really, really matter to me. Yeah.
Super. Great. Well, maybe I should also just ask you about your journey in ministry. You Edgehill College, and then what appointments had you?
So when I left, I apologize, just pinged there, so forgive my computer. After Edgehill, then I was stationed to the Grosvenor Hall, to Belfast Central Mission, where I had the best possible start as a young minister in a wonderful, warm congregation, and under the superintendency of David Kerr, who is just magnificent. So really grateful for those early years where training continues all the time, doesn't it? But you know, at that really crucial time where where David mentored me really, and guided and trained. So that's where I was, and then was ordained in 1992, and had requested permission to be without pastoral charge for 6 years, so sort of career break, because I was expecting our first son Peter at that point. And for us as a family, and different patterns are right for different families, but for us, we decided that I would take a career break for a few years while the family was young. So was without pastoral charge then for 6 years when Peter and then our son David were born, and then was stationed to Dundonald then in East Belfast for 6 years. Just a wonderful time again, another brilliant congregation of people who just love God and wanted to make a difference where they were. So really wonderful time. And then moved to Edge Hill, which is the Methodist Training College, in a role called Director of Ministry, which is about working with a bit of training and then continuing on with ministers in early years, which again I loved, and then was Home Mission Secretary, and then into this role, which is Secretary of Conference and General Secretary. Yeah,
fantastic. And it's good for me to hear just of your earlier ministry there. I suppose I really only properly met you, Heather, when you were kind of beginning as Director of Ministry at Edge Hill. I think I'd just left Edge Hill and you were officially starting. You waited till I was gone out of the place.
God is good all the time.
But certainly, of course, your role covered up until ordination, and that was something I really appreciated in those 2 years up to ordination. Right, so you've been in a few different settings there, and I suppose initially in the north, but then I suppose Home Missions brought you south at that point. And I'm just intrigued, I suppose, the Home Missions role, and you were covering, maybe running around the whole country and covering the interest of the whole church, and in terms of encouraging the mission development of the church. Any reflections from that time and what that role looked like, but maybe just more broadly about how is it easy or difficult for the church to prioritize mission? Do we get caught into our own little settings or corners, or any reflections at all on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about the Methodist Church is that we have a desire to be engaged with what God's doing in the world. So there isn't a sense, there's never been a sense for me of anyone, maybe people are just being polite, but I don't think so, of resisting, an impulse that the God who loves the whole world wants us to engage, in our churches and through our churches as bodies of people in everyday life discipleship. So I think that for me is a huge strength, Stephen. But here we are as a people who want this. I think our struggle is to push into that and do it, because you're absolutely right, and it's true for all of us that that we love our churches and we love things the way they are, and it's hard then to think, well, what new things might God be asking us to do in this time, or what needs to be set aside. And the other bit is that we're busy, and that's one of the things that COVID's really made us look at, and is mission, whatever, there's a broad definition. Mission can feel like an add-on to busy life, a bit of a burden, and actually so all of those fears are real, and let's be honest about that together, and I think we can do that in the context of relationship, and then think, right, this is all true, what's God calling us to do now? And that might, that will always be small steps, but God will lead us in that, and then let's see what the next thing is. But I think that one of the things that's really been puzzling me or running around my head is that starting at the beginning of the pandemic, we were saying we can't go back to the way we were. Yeah. And that made me think, well, what are we saying in that? What's the dissatisfaction with the way things were? Mm-hmm. And is God calling something out in us? Now, I wonder if so that's a real question for me. I wonder, was part of that around busyness or a shift in priorities? So I think the challenge for me and for us as a people, for all of us, because is how we live discipleship in the everyday things of life. Why, I'm thinking of friends I have who would not call themselves Christian, and who model love and kindness and goodness, and thinking, how do we recognize that good in others? How do we partner? How is my life different today? How are my friends, people I meet in the shop, being impacted? How am I allowing Jesus to touch their lives today through interactions? And it's the day-to-day piece. So I think we're people who want this. And it's how can we help each other to push into it?
Okay. Yeah. And that's crucial questions for the church. Do you think there are ways can we, I think you've alluded to some areas where church can just fall back into certain modes of doing things or whatever, and maybe I'm also reflecting on when you were president of the church, 7 or 8 years ago. You give a powerful, what I would say, prophetic voice to the church, and have continued, always do, no matter about that 1 year. Do you think at times we lose a prophetic nature to the church? Are we speaking out as church? Are we being as radical as we should be? Any reflections on that?
Yeah. I think that there's no doubt that we can just lapse back into comfort and even apathy, or just letting things tick over. That we do that. And I think that one of the challenges of this pandemic may be to do a bit of re-examination. So will we be open to allowing God to really push us there? Is a question I have. Am I open to that? I think that it's the church. The church must have a prophetic role in society and within the church. If we don't do that, we're stepping back. I think we're not being totally faithful.
Right.
Now, the question for me then is, what does that look like? Yeah. So I'm trying to think of the precise phrase. And Dr. Eric Gallagher, who's just an amazing man of God. I was reading some information about him for something I was doing this week, and one of his obituaries talked about a rare and courageous vision, I think it was. And it got me thinking, right, what does that look like now? Because we can be, prophecy is just empty words if it's not of God. Right. So it's quite easy to get on a soapbox and
right. Yeah.
Right. So there has to be that depth of relationship with God, that openness to what God is saying through God's word and directly and through God's people. The prophetic word has to come from that. And God forbid that we just rant on a soapbox, because all of us can do that. I think the other part of prophecy is that it has to be rooted in integrity. So if I, as a Christian, if we as the Methodist Church in Ireland aren't living out what we're being prophetic about, well then that's hypocrisy. Yeah. And we know what Jesus says about hypocrisy. Yeah. So those are the sort of bedrocks. Yeah. Yeah. And then we speak out of that. Now, prophecy then, the challenges for me are that prophecy, sometimes the prophets in the Bible are just discounted and rebuked. So be it, if it's coming from that root. The other part of it, though, for me, is that prophecy, I know I hear hard, challenging words best when they're coming from someone I trust. Right. So if there's a hard word coming from someone I'm thinking, or they don't know, they don't know me or the church, and but if it's somebody I trust, then I'll hear it. So it's, how does prophecy and relationship come together, which is one of the, I was hearing in your question. And of course, then we can lose an edge if we sacrifice speaking truth because we don't want to hurt someone or another group or wider society. And it's that there isn't an easy balance there. So I'm gonna hold out, maybe naively, for a balance between relationship and prophecy. And the same is true about community. You know, I don't want us as a church shouting at wider community from the sidelines. We're part of that. So it's relationship and prophecy. So it's a challenge, Stephen, you're right. And how we do it, got to be done. But those are the sort of questions for me around it. Yeah.
Wow. That's a powerful, I think that really needs to be heard, Heather. I really appreciate you sharing that. And particularly possibly in a context of social media where everybody can potentially say anything and maybe sound like they're speaking out or whatever. I think what you've said there, that depth is required today more than ever. So
it is. And social media is so interesting, Stephen, isn't it, in terms of how we, you know, what does a Christian voice look like in that context as well, and how we engage well. You know, it's a huge area of challenge and opportunity. Yeah.
Powerful. Maybe just thinking about, so you've been I suppose Secretary of Conference, and I suppose the title is General Secretary now of the Methodist Church in Ireland for the last 2.5 years. Now, maybe the obvious challenge within that time has been COVID. I should also mention the change in structures as well, and the adapting to new structures and to your role within that. I mean, has been, from looking from where I'm standing, that surely was also another great challenge. But so I think you've had the most ridiculously challenging start to an appointment imaginable. But do you want to reflect on the last couple of years as General Secretary?
Thank you. Yeah, it's been isn't it? I was interesting. Is a good word. It's I think that, well, the first thing to say is it's been challenging for everybody. So, you know, there's a you know, these are ways we've never walked before, and we're all facing that. And I think one of the things I value about Methodism, this particular church family, is a sense of together. You know, that we do, relationships do matter, and you know, we are together in this, and that's not easy. It's not all the time, but there's a sense of that. That's part of who we are. Yeah, it's so, there are lots of elements of change going on, and that's that for me is good. I think that I'm so grateful to God for the structural changes that we've done. We can see the influence of the district superintendents. So in Andrew and Stephen and Philip, we have 3 men of God who are being used by God in their different contexts. And I think that was so significant during COVID, because there was an added layer of support for ministers and for lay folks, and that, so thank God for that. I think that we're going through additional changes now in terms of governance. It's all a means to an end, Stephen.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just what I really look forward to the day, and we're not there yet, when, you know, nobody cares about structure, because it's just there and it's supporting what local churches are doing. And that's what this is about. It's you know, everything serves the mission of the local church, and that's what it's in place for. And one of the dangers, I think, of these days, and I think we're getting through it, is that, you know, structure becomes our focus, and, you know, it's a secondary thing, but it's needed to be there to support. I think that the walking through COVID added another layer to that. So at times I've been frustrated because, you know, it takes so much time looking at regulations, and, you know, it just feels, you know, there are other things we could be doing, but it's been necessary, and we've needed to walk through these days, you know, as well as we possibly could, and thank God for it, and for the way in which local churches, and, you know, you guys have been involved in that. I've just sought to be wise and good neighbours, and still continue to be the church through the challenge of COVID. So, you know, but they have been challenging times. The Secretary of Conference role is associated with conference, and we didn't have, we had an online conference and a deferred conference, and things were really, really different. But, through that, there've been, relationships are really good. Ecumenical relationships really developed because we sought to work together as churches through that. So there, God has used, we've learned as a church that we can change, that we can adapt really quickly when we have to. We're having to step back and think, right, in some places, numbers aren't returning the way they were. In some places there, what's that saying? What's God leading? So, God, I think, is using the most horrendous of circumstances, to bring good. God didn't cause this. God didn't want it. God weeps with the sadness of this. And God's one who continues to work even in horrible circumstances. So I think that's what we're seeing as a church. And the question now for me, for you, for us together is the what's next. And what's God leading us to do next, and are we up for that, which is the harder question.
Wow. Powerful. Thank you for that reflection, Heather, and thank you for your leadership in all of this time. It has been powerful. Maybe, I suppose, we've focused on a lot of the church things and your role there. Maybe to take it back to you personally a bit, is there anything else about Heather Morris that we well, there's plenty of things we don't know about you, I'm sure, but anyway, I'm just thinking, have you any other interests or anything that they're probably to do with people, I guess, knowing you, but which is obvious, but anything else you like to do? And if you get spare time at all, what would you do with it? So.
It's great. So we have 2 little grandchildren now, so they're the first. If there's time at all, being with them is just a joy. So love that. What are the other things I love to do? I love cooking and things, so haven't done much of that recently. Try not to bake too much because I wish I was generous enough to give it away, but if I bake I eat it. So I love Neil and I, my husband and I, just love walking. So if when I think about where people talk about happy places, for those who know the north, up at the top of a Hare's Gap as you go into the Mournes, and there's once you get over that Mourne wall, if there aren't too many people around, there's a silence there that hits, and I just love it. And you're looking over the view, and there's a particular quietness there. So we love walking in mountains. Somebody gave me a hard time, in lockdown when all we could do was walk. Somebody asked me, "What are you going to do in your first holiday?" And I said, "Go and walks in the Lake District." And they said, "What?" But it's that is it. We love walking, and I love cinema. So that's my other one. So we've been back to the cinema now, and enjoy film. Yeah.
Super, great. Oh well, that's wonderful. And thank you, Heather. And yes, I forgotten to mention your grandchildren, so that's wonderful. Well, listen, we really appreciate this time. Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for sharing your hearts and your experience with us. And we continue to wish you well for all the work that you lead us in, and for everything that you're part of. So.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us,
Really
Heather.
enjoyed it. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you.